Good evening to you all. Good evening, good evening. Now, the idea of fulfilling work, that is a job that embodies your values, your talents, and your passions, that's a thoroughly modern invention. If you open Dr. Samuel Johnson's famous dictionary, published in 1755, you'll find that the word fulfillment isn't even there. And what's actually happened is that over the last few decades, we've had a rising expectation for work which is more than just the salary. And that's why today in the Western world, 60% of workers say that they're unfulfilled by their jobs. Now, you may well be part of that 60%. Or maybe you just have that occasional niggling feeling that your work and yourself are slightly out of alignment. So what I'd like to do is offer you 5 ways of thinking about the art of career change. 5 ways of thinking about finding work that can make you feel fully alive, to help you negotiate the labyrinth of possibilities and choices and help you make the best decisions along the way. Now, the first thing I'd like you to think about is this: to recognize that changing career and the prospect of doing so is utterly confusing. All those options, all those possible pathways, it's no surprise that we're perplexed about what to do. And that's because in the pre-industrial period, there were only about 30 different jobs that you could possibly do. You might be a barrel maker or a cobbler. But today, you can go to careers websites that offer up to 12,000 different jobs. It's no wonder we're feeling confused. But add to that the fact that that quaint ideal of the job for life is now a relic of the 20th century. We change our jobs every 4 years, so we're having to make career decisions more and more often right throughout our working lives. Now, you might think that this would offer us something good, a huge array of choices. That's positive, right? But the psychologist Barry Schwartz points out why this is problematic. Because sometimes when you've got too many choices, you're so worried about making the wrong decision and regretting that decision that you make that you end up doing nothing at all. And that's why so many people stay in jobs that they've long grown out of. Schwartz calls it the paradox of choice, that basically having an overload of choices leads to decision paralysis. We're like a rabbit caught in the headlights. But there's another problem, which is that human beings are naturally risk-averse. As the psychologist put it, we hate losing twice as much as we love winning, whether we're at the casino table or when we're thinking about possible new careers that we might do. So I think the lesson we should draw from this is that we have to accept that being confused is perfectly natural and get ready to move beyond it. Now, this takes me to my second point of the 5 ways of thinking about career change, which is you must beware the lure of personality tests. Because if we're feeling confused, obviously we want an easy way out. And one of the easiest ways to do it is fill out some personality questionnaire, which will tell you exactly what your character is, and that will then direct you towards a particular profession or industry. Now, the problem is that there's very little scientific evidence that that kind of process will actually lead you to fulfilling work. I mean, take, for example, the most famous psychometric test in the world called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. That puts you into one of 16 personality categories. And they become increasingly popular amongst careers advisors who will tell you to do a Myers-Briggs test and then say, well, therefore you should be, go into IT management or become an architect or something like that. Now, if you retake a Myers-Briggs test, after a 5-week period, there's a 50% chance you'll be put into a different personality category. So I think if you're making some of the biggest decisions of your life, career decisions, it would be quite unwise to put too much faith in tests like that. Now, I've been clearing the ground, really, but now you need to think about, well, what does a meaningful job actually look like? One thing to think about is whether you should aim to be a high achiever or a wide achiever. Now, for the past century, the traditional way we've been taught by culture, the best way to use our talents is to become an expert in a narrow field, to become a specialist, a high achiever, a logo designer, or a corporate tax accountant, or an anesthetist, or something like that. But an increasing proportion of people are feeling that plowing that narrow furrow isn't doing enough for nurturing the many sides of who they are. And for those people, it's worth thinking about not aiming to achieve high, but to achieve wide. Now, the obvious place to go for inspiration is to the great Renaissance generalists like Leonardo da Vinci, who in any one week he might be painting a portrait for an artistic patron, he might be then doing a bit of mechanical engineering on the side, and on the weekends conducting some anatomy experiments. Of course, what he's doing is doing several jobs at the same time, and often on a freelance basis. And that's what we today call being a portfolio worker. You might be an economist 3 days a week, and a couple of days a week you're doing freelance wedding photography. Now, the management guru, Charles Handy, has pointed out that being a wide achiever or portfolio worker is actually quite useful in dark economic times. In an era of job insecurity, it actually spreads the risk. But there's something more positive, which is that it's an extraordinary opportunity given to us by the new era of flexible work. As he points out, for the first time in the human experience, we have a chance to shape our work to suit the way we live, instead of our lives to fit our work. We'd be mad to miss the chance. But doing several jobs at the same time is not the only way to be a wide achiever. You could, for example, be what I think of as being a serial specialist. You do one job after another, often for a few years at a time. And that's a path that I've personally pursued. I used to be an academic, then I became a professional gardener. I was a journalist, then I became a community worker, and I've also tried a rather difficult job of being a full-time father to young twins. But what I think that thought could leave you with is to ask yourself this question: what would being a wide achiever encompass for me? Now, another thing to think about, thinking about what fulfillment really looks like in work, is to try and find work where your values and your talents meet. And 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle probably had the wisest piece of career advice to offer the Western world in history, which is that where the needs of the world and your talents cross, there lies your vocation. And in fact, modern research has shown that he's probably right, that if you follow an ethical career, you're doing work, working on something that you really care about, and you're also doing a job that's something that you're really good at, you're likely to have much higher levels of career fulfillment and job fulfillment than almost anybody else. So we can ask ourselves this question, where do our talents meet the needs of the world? Now, I think I've spoken enough for the moment, because I'd like you to talk to each other and think about some of these ideas. In a moment, when I say go, I would like you to get into a pair with a person next to you or someone in the pew behind you. Make sure they're a stranger if you can do it. And I want you to spend just 2 minutes, only 2 minutes, talking about the question which is on the screen here, which is that imagine 3 parallel universes. And in each, you have a year to try out any kind of work that you want. What 3 jobs would you be excited to try? So, on the count of 3, I want to hear your voices in pairs filling this pleasure dome with your ideas. 1, 2, 3, go! Okay, can I have your attentions, please? Could you please cease your conversations? Because we need to get back to work. Because there's one more point I'd like to make. And that is about how to actually start taking action. You may have these brilliant ideas about jobs that you might want to pursue, but how do you actually do something about it in practice? And what I think you need to do is remember this: to act first and reflect later. Now, let me tell you what I mean. Probably the biggest mistake that people make in career change is to follow a model of change which has been around for about 100 years, and it's called the plan then implement model. And what you do in the plan and implement model is you go into deep internal self-reflection, you write down lists of your strengths and weaknesses, your ambitions and your aspirations, and you try and match those to particular professions, and once you've made that golden connection, you start sending out your CV and applications. Now, that process, which is what most careers advisors will tell you to do, is actually quite a good way of getting a job. But it's not a very good way of getting a fulfilling job. In fact, the latest research shows that we need to flip that model completely on its head. Instead of thinking then acting, we need to act first and think later. We need to actually take that frightening step into that place called the real world and start conducting experiments. We need to do a bit of experiential learning by shadowing people and doing voluntary work in places, jobs that you might think are particularly interesting. Now, one specific way to do this is to do what I think of as a radical sabbatical. And someone I knew who did this, her name's Laura, and in her 20s she had a series of incredibly miserable jobs in arts administration. And then for her 30th birthday, she decided to give herself a rather unusual present, which was to spend a whole year trying out 30 different jobs. So she spent a week as a manager of a cat hotel, then she shadowed a member of the European Parliament, she tried out a bit of fashion photography, she was a reviewer for bed and breakfasts, and she also spent a bit of time in an advertising agency, amongst other places. And what she discovered at the end was that finding fulfilling work is a bit like finding a lover. I mean, you might have a list of 10 criteria for the perfect lover, and you meet someone who ticks all those 10 boxes, and they do absolutely nothing for you. And then you meet someone who ticks none of them, and they completely blow you away. And that's exactly what happens in the search for work. That's what Laura found. She actually discovered that spending time in an advertising agency, something that she'd never contemplated before and she thought she'd hate, she actually found it extraordinarily exhilarating. What she had found was the virtues of acting first and reflecting later. And so I think we can all ask ourselves, how might we embark on a radical sabbatical? But that's probably too daunting for many of us. Do we really want to do that? And there's another less daunting option, which is to embark on what you might think of as branching projects or temporary assignments. There's this great myth that you need to change career by handing in your resignation on a Monday morning and stepping into the unknown. But no, you can actually hold on to your current job and do experiments on the side. If there are any disenchanted bankers in the room, well, you could spend your weekends teaching a bit of yoga on the side or trying out doing some freelance web design, build it up over time. And what actually happens is that you overcome that fear of change, that risk averseness that we have, because these small changes can lead to big results. So I think we can all ask ourselves, if you were going to undertake a branching project, what would that project be? And over the next month, what is the first step you could take to make that happen? So let me just summarize that. First, I think we need to recognize that confusion is normal. If you're feeling perplexed and in a daze about it, you are not alone. Beware of the lure of those personality tests, the easy option. Think about what meaning might mean for you, whether it's achieving wide rather than achieving high, whether it's finding where your values and your talents meet. And let's explode that old idea of plan and implement, replace it by act first and reflect later. But let me leave you with a final thought. Of course, the idea of career change is frightening to most people. I mean, 60% of people, as I said, do want to change careers, but half of them are too afraid to do so. And I think you can take some wise advice from the 19th century poet and essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "Do not be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. What if they're a little coarse and you may get your coat soiled or torn? What if you do fail and get fairly rolled in the dirt once or twice? Up again, you shall never be so afraid of a tumble." Emerson realized that to live a vibrant and meaningful life, sometimes we do have to experiment. We have to take chances. Otherwise, we're going to live our lives with regret. And we should also remember one more thing, which is that we change as people throughout our lives. In fact, we're incredibly bad judges of our future selves. At 18 or 21, you might decide to become a lawyer, but by the time you're 35 or 40, you're a different kind of person. Your interests and priorities have changed. You've got a family, you've got different values. And I think what happens is that gradually over time, our self and our work drift apart. And we need to try and bring those back into alignment. And I think that's a good reason why probably at least one time in your life, you ought to make a big and drastic career change. That, I think, is the way that you're going to find work that is big enough for your spirits. That is the way I believe that we'll be able to live deep and suck all the marrow from life. Thank you.